I've been patient enough. It smelled rancid. Again, this did nothing. I made it work. I grew plants. Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Emma, and today we're going to be talking about these little small Alocasia poly babies that I grew from their bulbs. So if you're following me over on my Instagram, you will probably have seen that my Alocasia amazonica, Alocasia poly, had a bit of a thrips issue, and it threw a tantrum after that and killed off all of its leaves but one. I know, right? Not ideal. So I was a bit worried about it. I was worried that I had killed it, but all of you lovely people over on Instagram told me I hadn't killed it, to be patient, give it a repot, and keep treating it right, and it would grow back. And luckily now it has. But when I was repotting it, giving it some fresh soil, I found a bunch of these little ball-like acorn kind of looking things in the soil, and I was like really confused about what they were. So I collected all the ones that I could, and I found out that they're actually Alocasia bulbs. And I was like, what do I do with these? Again, loads of you helped out over on Instagram telling me what I could do with them, and I made it work. I grew plants from like essentially nothing, like the equivalent of a seed for the Alocasia. And I'm really, really proud of myself for getting this far. And so I figured, why not share my journey with all of you? So yeah, I'm just gonna talk about how I grew these beautiful babies and how you can potentially grow some for yourself too. So this method doesn't only work for the Alocasia amazonica or poly. It works for all types of Alocasia. All of them grow from bulbs. I've seen people do them with dragon scale and Zebrina as well. So it might be worth checking out your soil of your Alocasia to see if you could grow some plants from bulbs. So before we get started, I just want to say if you do like this video, please do give it a thumbs up down below and comment on other planty things you'd like me to talk about, and subscribe here for more. Right, let's get into it. So you're probably not going to be able to buy Alocasia bulbs online. I had a quick look and I couldn't find very many sellers. So the best bet for trying to grow Alocasia from bulbs is to have a look in the soil of your Alocasia. The bulbs will just be like rolling around in your soil, chilling out in there, but basically they will be grown by your plant because it's propagating itself in the soil as you speak. You can harvest them and grow them for yourself. So like I said, I found them all when I was repotting my plant, and that's a pretty good time to harvest your Alocasia bulbs. All of the ones that I found weren't actually attached to the plant. They weren't connected to the roots, so they were just kind of sitting in there. But sometimes you will find them attached to the roots of the plant, which means the plant is still growing the bulb. If you find one that's like quite thin, not a good round bulb shape, you don't want to take that one off because it's not ready. Also, if they're like pretty solidly attached to the roots, you don't want to take that off. If you can kind of tap it and it falls away from the roots easily, then it's totally ready and could potentially give you a new little baby Alocasia plant. Also, it's possible that some of the bulbs that you find aren't actually going to produce you a plant. Some of them might be dead already upon harvesting, which kind of sucks, but I mean, hey, that's how it goes. So I found 17 bulbs in my Alocasia soil, and so far I've only been able to get 3 different plants. There's actually 3 bulbs in here, and they have each grown 1 leaf. But that just goes to show that not all of them are going to work. Some of them might be dead already. A surefire way to know that it's dead is before you plant it, if you squeeze it with your fingers, if it's hard and like feels kind of like a pebble, then it is still alive, it can still be planted. If it's squishy, that means it's already rotted and it is never gonna grow. So if you find any that are squishy, it's best to just toss them away before you even start, because it's not gonna grow anything, it's already rotten. And it's really, really important that you are growing the bulb the right way up in many of these propagation methods. So this is the right side up. It's got a little tiny point on top, and it's kind of got what looks like a root going down the bottom. And keeping it upright is important because the sprout is going to come out from the top of the bulb, and if it's facing the other way around or sideways or something, it might get a little like wonky curvy, which probably isn't the best way to start off your plant. It's better start it off straight and tall because then it'll grow the right way. So because I found so many bulbs in my soil, I figured why not do a little experiment, try to see how many I could get to grow and try a few different ways to see which way worked best for me. So I tried 5 different methods trying to get the alocasia bulbs to sprout. And personally, I found that only 2 of them worked. So let's go through those. So I'm going to be talking about all of these ways from my experience. Some of them worked for me and some of them didn't. But just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean it's not going to work for you. So I would totally suggest trying out all of these for yourselves because it is fun. It's fun to see what works and what doesn't for you and in your environment. So I'm going to go through the methods that didn't work before I go through the methods that did work because it's all about trial and error. So I figured it's good to share my whole experience. So the first method I decided to try was straight to soil. This is probably the easiest method. You don't need anything other than typical houseplant soil and a pot and maybe some sort of jar or like a plastic bag or something that would keep the humidity in. You want to get the little pot, put soil in, make a little hole, put the bulb in, cover it up with soil and water it. And you want to make sure it's staying like moist-ish, but not like sopping wet because otherwise the bulb will just rot and we don't want that. But that's why having the kind of jar lid, I just used a pickle jar, worked really well to kind of keep the humidity in. So this method didn't work for me. I did not get any sprouting bulbs. Maybe it was that the bulbs that I had were already dead or weren't gonna sprout at all, or maybe I just wasn't patient enough. But I figured if I have some bulbs that like already have leaves, I've been patient enough. I don't know, like it doesn't make sense that one would take like 4 months and one would take 2 months. Like I don't get it. The next method I tried was the jararium method. So it's where you have a jar and you make a terrarium out of it. It's very similar to the first method, but you're kind of making an enclosed system within the jar. So in order to do this, I have little mason jars and I put rocks at the bottom to provide it with adequate drainage. Put a layer of soil, stuck some holes in the soil, put the bulbs in, a little bit more soil, close the jar and let it sit. Again, this did nothing. Same as before. I don't know if just the bulbs were dead or I just wasn't being patient enough, but I got no growth out of that. So the next method I tried was the perlite method, where you just get a jar, put perlite in a jar, put a little bit of water in there, stick your bulbs in, a little bit more perlite, and then I personally sealed up the jar. I don't know if that was a mistake or not because I didn't get any sprouts from that either, and then when I emptied it out later, it smelled rancid. I don't know if that was just water sitting for that long will just get gross. Maybe I didn't open the jar enough to let it air, but it smelled awful. Like I was pouring it out into the compost bin and just so gross, so gross. I had to like hold my breath. It was that gross. Like I said, it didn't work for me. It might work for you. Maybe I would try it again without putting a top on the jar and instead using perlite kind of in the same way that you'd use leca. But I don't know, it just didn't work for me and that's okay. The first successful method for me was leca. I had like a tiny amount of leca and that worked really, really, really well for me. I had a jar and I put leca in the jar, I put my bulb in and I put leca around it and then put in a little bit of water, not covering the entire bulb, kind of leaving it half exposed. So it had access to the water, but not like too much access to the water. So that was the fastest, most effective method in my personal opinion. The sprout came out the fastest and the roots formed really well. So if you do have leca, I would totally suggest trying that method. This method works so well that when I kind of called it quits on my experiment and decided to dismantle the other methods, I decided to put some of those bulbs that didn't work, that weren't like squishy or anything, they weren't rotted, but they weren't sprouting. I decided to put some of them in some more leca and I've got 3 in here right now, and so far, one of them has already sprouted, which I'm super excited about. Like, it's already starting to work, which further proves to me that this method is one of the better methods. Just because it doesn't work in one method doesn't mean it won't work in another. I'm hoping that these ones will sprout as well, and I'll be able to have more alocasia babies. The other method that did work for me was a bit more simple, and I like to call it the shallow puddle method. In this method, you take a small container, put the bulbs in it, and then you put a little bit of water in it. In this one, you can't really keep them vertical because you've got a shallow puddle. You don't really have things to help support keeping them vertical. So they were laying horizontal, which is fine. In the end, it didn't really matter. So I put 3 bulbs in this little shallow puddle in my little tiny IKEA Tupperware. And 2 of those 3 bulbs ended up sprouting. The other one, I don't know what happened to it, but it kind of got a bit squishy, so I got worried and decided to chuck it because I didn't want it to contaminate the other ones with rot, because that isn't ideal. But I found that this method worked really well as well. For the most part, I think I kept the container closed, but I would let it breathe every once in a while or change the water if it started looking super grimy. But because I found that method to work so effectively, when I dismantled the others, I put some of the bulbs that didn't sprout in the other method in here with a little bit more water in my little shallow puddle. So far, I think they're doing pretty well. 2 of the 3 in here are starting to sprout a little bit, which is really good. You can see that it's got a little bit of white poking out at the top. That is the sprout starting to form, which is awesome. Already on the right track. So that's really good. It's probably the easiest. You need the least amount of supplies. You just need a shallow container with a lid and water. So eventually I did decide to take the ones that were in the shallow puddle and combine them in with the one that I had in LECA already. And they seemed to really like that. They were totally fine with that transition, but I could probably pot them up in soil if I wanted to. I'm just really enjoying the LECA. I like to be able to like see the roots in there. I can watch them grow. I might end up potting them like properly into semi-hydro eventually, but I quite like being able to see the roots in the glass. So in total, it took about 2 months for these ones to grow their leaves and have them completely unfurl. It has since been a month and they've been doing pretty well. I've just been noticing more and more roots growing, which is amazing. I haven't really noticed any more sprouts, but I'm just gonna let them take their time and do their thing. I've given them a little bit of liquid gold leaf fertilizer to maybe boost that process. Yeah, they're doing really well, and they're really happy, and I'm really happy with the success I've had with this method. And hopefully in another month or 2, the ones that I took out of the other methods and put in LECA and water will have leaves as well, because that would be awesome. It feels good. Like, these leaves didn't exist at all. They weren't gonna be plants. They could have never become plants, but they did, and I made it happen, and so it feels really good. In all of these methods, it's important to not keep the bulbs too soggy. You don't want them to be fully submerged in water and staying submerged in water, because they do need the oxygen and the air as well to like help them grow, I guess. If you submerge them fully in water like you would a node when you're water propagating, it'll just rot. It just won't work. So best to keep it kind of like moist, but not like soaking wet. Also, I read that you're probably supposed to clean the bulbs every now and then to prevent mold and like fungus and stuff. Definitely didn't do that. But I can understand why you want to prevent that if possible. So that's it. That's how I grew these beautiful little babies. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go give a thumbs up down below and comment on other planty things you'd like me to talk about in the future, and subscribe for more. Also, go follow me over on Instagram, because like honestly, that's where I post regular updates about things. So if you want to see what happens with these new bulbs or these beautiful already leafed plants, there'll be updates on over there. I might make a story highlight. So go check that out, and you get to see all my other plants too. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye! I just love these roots. They're just so cool. Like, look at them. Just look at them. they're so awesome and amazing, doing their own little rooty thing. It's insane.